Margaret Wilson had worked at the same university library for 15 years. Quiet, modest, a woman who rarely spoke beyond necessity. Students called her the librarian lady. Until that day when a student accidentally discovered her old files. What was written on that folder would freeze everyone in place. CIA, classified level, special access, welcome to Daily Story. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden identity, discovery, and long overdue recognition, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Chapter 1. Librarian Margaret Wilson. The Georgetown University Central Library was a magnificent building with high ceilings and marble columns, resembling a palace with its crystal chandeliers. In this grand setting, in the quietest corner, behind the catalog desk, Margaret Wilson worked. 52-year-old Margaret was a medium-built, slender woman. She always dressed the same way: dark-colored blouse, simple slacks, and comfortable shoes. Her hair was usually pulled back in a bun, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and she would tilt her head slightly forward when examining files. Her desk was always organized. Red pens on the left side, blue pens on the right, files arranged alphabetically. Her coffee cup always sat in the same spot, the upper right corner of her desk. Even when she drank her coffee, no one paid attention to her or noticed her presence. Students would come, ask for help, but usually didn't talk much with her. Ms. Wilson, could you help me find this book? They'd say, and she would nod and quietly assist. She never asked questions, never showed curiosity about what they were looking for. She just did her job. Faculty members treated her similarly. They'd come, state what resources they needed, and Margaret would find and bring them. No one chatted with her, no one asked about her personal life. And she never talked about herself to anyone. Even other library staff barely knew her. During breaks, she usually sat alone, drinking her coffee and reading books. During lunch breaks, she never left the library, quietly eating the sandwich she brought. She had no close friendships with anyone. Among students, there were various theories about Margaret Wilson. Most saw her as the librarian lady. She was assumed to be a woman who had never married, lived with books, disconnected from the outside world. Does Ms. Wilson have any life outside the library? Students would wonder among themselves. She probably reads books at home too. Some went further, saying, she's never had any adventure in her life. Born, raised, became a librarian. Always living the same routine. Young women sometimes pitted her. What a boring life, they'd say among themselves. Never been in love, never experienced excitement. Just books and files. Male students barely noticed her at all. They saw her as part of the library furniture. They wouldn't even ask, where's Ms. Wilson? They'd say, the lady at the catalog desk. But none of them knew who that quiet woman really was. James Mitchell was a 28-year-old doctoral student in political science. His dissertation topic was Cold War-era American foreign policy and intelligence operations. He was conducting very detailed research and constantly spent time in the library. That day he had come to the library as usual. He was looking for some documents and newspapers from the 1980s for his research. He asked Margaret for help. Ms. Wilson, do you have archival documents from the 1985 to 1990 period? Particularly about foreign policy and security issues. Margaret adjusted her glasses, slowly raised her head. Something different flickered in her eyes for a moment, as if she was remembering those years. But she quickly collected herself. Yes, we do. What specific topics are you looking into? CIA activities from that period, intelligence operations, especially work in Eastern Bloc countries. This time James noticed Margaret pause. As if these topics were very familiar to her. All right, let me get you the appropriate documents from the archive section. Margaret stood up and walked toward the archive. James noticed something different about her walk. Each step seemed measured, careful, and deliberate. Different from a normal librarian's walk. 20 minutes later Margaret returned. She had several files in her hands. As she placed them on James's table, one of the files fell to the floor. James bent down to pick it up, and as he handed the file back to Margaret, he saw the label on it. CIA Archives, Classified Documents M. Wilson file. James was surprised. M. Wilson? Margaret's last name was Wilson. But this could just be a coincidence. Ms. Wilson, James said, this file says M. Wilson. Same as your last name. Margaret took the file, quickly glanced at it, and became slightly tense. Common last name. Must be a coincidence. But James had noticed something strange in her reaction. As if she knew that file very well. When he went home that day, James continued thinking about this. Margaret's reaction was very strange. And how quickly she had recognized that file. The next day James came to the library again. This time he would be more careful. He began observing Margaret. The first thing he noticed was how easily she read documents in other languages. She examined Russian, English, and German documents as if they were her native language. This was very unusual for a normal librarian. The second thing he noticed was her knowledge on security matters. Margaret gave very detailed answers to the questions James asked. Not just information from books, but as if she had lived through it. Ms. Wilson, James said, you're very knowledgeable about these topics. How do you know so much detail? Margaret paused. I've been working on these subjects for many years. From reading. But James thought this wasn't a sufficient explanation. In the third week of his research, while James was working in the archive, he accidentally bumped into the cabinet behind Margaret's desk. The cabinet opened slightly and several personal files fell out. James was collecting the files. He saw the writing on one of them and froze. CIA personnel Margaret Wilson, operational agent security clearance, special access. His heart started beating rapidly. This was impossible. Was librarian Margaret Wilson a CIA agent? When he opened the file, what he saw shocked him completely. Service start, 1985 areas of operation, Eastern Bloc intelligence, counterintelligence language proficiencies, Russian, English, German, Bulgarian operations, 47 successful mission special skills, deep cover identity, long-term infiltration service end, 2008. Retired by own request. James's hands were trembling. The ordinary librarian he had worked with for 15 years was actually a CIA agent who had conducted the country's most secret operations. Just then Margaret returned. When she saw James with the files, her face took on a serious expression. She was no longer the normal, timid librarian. Her posture straightened, her eyes sharpened. Put those files down, she said calmly but with a commanding tone. James put the files down but couldn't stop from speaking. Were you really a CIA agent? Margaret looked at him. There was a long silence. Then she took a deep breath. That's what you're suggesting, she said slowly. But how? You've been working here as a librarian for 15 years. No one knows. Because they don't need to know, Margaret said. I left that life behind. James was still in shock. 47 successful operations. Eastern Bloc countries. This is incredible. Margaret sat at her desk. Her mask had fallen. Her posture, speech, and gaze had completely changed. Listen, James, she said. From 1985 to 2008, I worked for 23 years for this country's security. I conducted secret missions for years in the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Bulgaria. James listened as if mesmerized. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, I learned the Soviet intelligence plans for America. During the 1991 Gulf War, I tracked enemy countries' activities in the United States. In 1999, I identified international terrorist networks' connections. So why did you quit? Why did you become a librarian? Margaret smiled. It was the first real smile. For 23 years, I lived with other identities. I became Anna, I became Katerina, I became Elena. But I never got to be Margaret. When I lost my mother in 2008, I realized I needed to start living my life for myself. But how are such important pieces of information kept secret? James asked. The existence of agents like me is known by very few people. Our files are protected with the highest level of security. When we retire, we live with our new identities. What about your family? Friends. My family knows I'm a librarian. Friends. I never really had real friends. This profession is like that. You can't get close to people because you might endanger their safety at any moment. James was beginning to understand the sacrifice this woman had made. You've been working here for 15 years. Don't you ever miss that life? Margaret thought. Sometimes. Especially when I hear about threats to our country. But there are young agents now. My time has passed. James, Margaret said, you can't share what you've seen with anyone. Why? Because it would be dangerous both for my security and the state's security. Former agents' identities must be protected. James nodded. I understand. But could you help me? With my research. Margaret was surprised. How help? You lived through those periods. You could contribute greatly to my dissertation. Of course, not classified information, but general approaches. This suggestion pleased Margaret. I think that's a good idea. But only open information. In the following weeks, James and Margaret began working together. James now knew her real identity, but everything remained the same to the outside world. Margaret made tremendous contributions to James's dissertation work. She explained the real dynamics of the Cold War period, the workings of the intelligence world, and the secret factors behind international relations. Were you ever caught? James asked one day.
Twice.
In Bulgaria in 1989 and in Moscow in 1995. Both times I was saved by my diplomatic immunity. Weren't you scared?
Always. Fear keeps you alive.
An agent who isn't afraid is a dead agent. Months passed and the day of James's dissertation defense arrived. Margaret wasn't at the library that day. For the first time, she had left her duties to attend James's defense. The professors on the defense committee were amazed by the depth of James's work. Especially the sections about intelligence activities were very detailed and realistic. How did you access such detailed information? Asked one of the jury members. James smiled. I had a very good research assistant. The defense was completed successfully. James received his doctoral degree with excellent grade. After the graduation ceremony, James found Margaret.
MS.
Wilson, I don't know how to thank you.
You taught me a lot too, James.
You reminded me that my past is a valuable part not just of mine, but of the country's. So what will you do now?
Margaret thought.
Maybe it's time to retire. Maybe it's time to pass on my memories to young people.
What do you mean?
I'm thinking of working as an academic advisor. Of course, without sharing classified information, but by conveying my experiences. 6 months later, Margaret started working as an advisor in the International Relations and Security Studies department at the university. She was no longer completely hiding her identity. Students called her Professor Wilson. Her classes were very popular because she enriched theoretical knowledge with experiences she had lived in practice. Trust is very important in international relations, she would tell her students. But there's a difference between trusting and being naive. James was now working as a research assistant at the same university with his doctoral title. He occasionally worked with Margaret on projects. A year later, a special ceremony was held on the CIA's foundation anniversary. Retired agents were to be honored. Margaret was also invited to attend the ceremony. The CIA director gave a speech. Margaret Wilson is a devoted citizen who risked her life for our country's security for 23 years, hid her identity, and stayed away from her family. Thanks to heroes like her, we live in peace today. The applause lasted a long time. When Margaret went on stage, her former colleagues gave her a standing ovation. For 23 years I lived with different identities, she said into the microphone. But today here with my real identity in my own country with my own people, I'm experiencing the pride of being together.
2 years have passed.
Margaret had become a beloved professor at the university. Her old days at the library seemed very far away. One day she visited her old library. The new librarian, a young woman, asked her, "You worked here for a long time, right? What was it like back then?"
Margaret smiled. It was quiet.
But sometimes silence hides the greatest stories. The young woman didn't understand these words. But Margaret did. Now she knew who she was. She wasn't a secret agent, nor was she a librarian.
She was herself.
A woman at peace with her past, hopeful about her future, sharing her experiences. So have you ever encountered someone like this? Someone who appeared ordinary but had an extraordinary past? Share your story in the comments. Tell us which city you're watching from. If this story added something to your life, subscribe and support this channel. Because at Daily Story we give voice to forgotten heroes. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the biggest secrets are hidden in the most ordinary places.